Happy Friday, everybody. You're listening to Beyond Reason Radio. Well, of course you know that by now. Beyond Reason Radio, which is every Friday night at 8 p.m. on this station, News Radio 102.5 WFLA and BeyondReasonRadio.com. And Beyond Reason Radio is brought to you by Doc's Street Side Grill, which is on Orange Avenue, right across from ORMC. You can get free parking in the attached garage. I just want to say a couple things about Blaise Mercadante, the owner of Doc's Street Side Grill and Doc's Street Side Grill. First of all, it's a great place to go. It's a great place to eat, great atmosphere. But I also wanted to give a special thanks to them over there for being a sponsor of this show. As most of you know out there, I'm a young guy. I'm just starting. I'm just getting my feet wet with this show. I'm just trying to get my career started and give you a good show and a good product every Friday night. But because I'm new, there's a lot of sponsors out there who might not want to take a chance on me, who might think, oh, he's too young, he's too new. But Blaise Mercadante, the owner of Doc's Street Side Grill, really nice guy. We met. He's a big fan of the show, big supporter of the show, and he wanted to be a sponsor of the show and to get this show really started and to give this show a permanent slot, 8 p.m. Fridays. So I just have to thank everybody. I have to thank Blaise Mercadante for taking that chance on me, and I have to thank everybody at Doc's Street Side Grill. This show doesn't happen without advertising. It doesn't happen without sponsors. So I appreciate them as well. Anyone else, I would appreciate anyone else who might want to sponsor. I appreciate the fans as well. So if I'm giving you a product, if I'm endorsing a product, I believe in the product, and I want you, the listeners, to know that. So I just support the advertiser. Anybody I endorse, fans out there, if you like the show and you support the show, make sure to support the advertisers of this show, and especially Doc's Street Side Grill. Not just because I say it, but because it's a great place to go and eat and have a good time. So just a special note to Blaise Mercadante at Doc's Street Side Grill for being the official sponsor of Beyond Reason Radio. All right, well, it's Friday, and there's a lot of breaking news out there. The biggest breaking news, obviously, is the Boston bomber, thankfully, was sentenced to death today. The jurors unanimously said he deserves a death penalty, which, if there is anybody in this country right now who deserves the death penalty, it is the Boston bomber, Tsarnaev. Just think about what this country gave to him and his brother and his family. They gave him an opportunity to better their lives, to come over here, to go to school, to live a prosperous life, to live in a free country, to practice their religious beliefs freely. And instead of being accepting of that, instead of being thankful, grateful to a country who gives them that opportunity, they decide to be murderers, to be terrorists, mass killers, and to bomb and kill and injure innocent people just out to enjoy the marathon. The 4 people who were killed at the marathon, then the security guard a few nights later when he found them. If there's anyone who deserves a death penalty, it's this guy. And then after he was caught, the things he said, flicking off the camera in the prison cell, all that stuff. The people he killed and his brother killed were young people looking forward to the rest of their lives, and it was tragically cut short. One of them being a young boy. Other people lost their eyesight, other people lost limbs, many injuries. And I hope this can help bring closure to them. Obviously, they will never fully recover from what happened, but I hope I hope this will eventually bring closure to them and justice will be done. Now, there's no telling how long it will take for the death penalty to be carried out. Obviously, there's an automatic appeals process that happens. The precedent for this maybe would be the Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh. He was sentenced in 1997, I believe. Yes, he was sentenced in 1997 and he was executed in 2001. So hopefully it won't take any longer than that for this person to be executed like he should be. And there's not really a whole lot more to say about this because I can't imagine there's any controversy surrounding this. Can't be too many people who disagree with that. That if we have a death penalty in this country, it is specifically for people like him. So, and it was obvious he showed no remorse for what he did. And he deserves to die. And justice should be done. The other big story, of course, is the latest details with the Amtrak crash, the train crash. I'm finding out this week. I didn't really know this. I live in Florida, and we don't ride the train a lot in this city. It's mostly drive in this city, and I mostly drove. But I didn't realize how dependent we are on the engineers of the train really doing their good job, really doing a good job. That if they fall asleep or if they get injured or something happens, the train can derail like what happened in Philadelphia. And they're not sure of the details. Now details are coming out. The engineer says he doesn't remember exactly what happened. One of the other members of the staff says she heard him say something about something hit the train and that right before it derailed. So there might be some controversy in that. They don't know if he fell asleep, maybe he had a seizure. We're not exactly sure what happened yet. But what we do know is the train sped up to over 100 miles an hour, went around a curve way too fast. The automatic braking system that they're putting in trains and curves like that was not on yet. They was still through the testing phase. So we definitely need something like that. But I just started thinking about this and I never really realized how dependent we are on engineers of trains to really do a good job. And the train in Philadelphia is not the only example of that. We have the train at the Orlando International Airport where a person was killed. It turns out the engineer of that tram, they let one of their friends take over the train while they were kind of messing around, and he messed around and he pushed the lever or let go of the lever or something, and the automatic braking system hit on, and he flew through the front window because it stopped so fast. It's amazing the glass didn't stop him. So, and then he fell 15 or so feet to his death. Actually, probably more feet than that. He fell to his death after flying from the train. Another case where the engineer, being irresponsible, caused someone to die. And I never realized before how dependent we are on our engineers. So it shows you one thing, that most of the train engineers, they usually do an amazing job because this is a very rare thing. It doesn't happen that much. But it was just something I was thinking about. And what's also interesting, and I was talking to my dad the other day, and he calls me and he goes, I take that train at the Orlando International Airport all the time. And I always sit in the front because if you sit right in the front, you can get off the train sooner. And he told me, if that's their safety mechanism, where it automatically brakes, and it happened where this guy flew out the front window, I'm never going to sit in the front of that train again. Because that could happen to me. If it happened to him, I'm up in the front. If it ever stopped before when I was there, I could have been him flying out the front of the window. So there's some questions about the safety mechanism of that train as well. And that was an interesting point. He was telling other people, and they were saying the same thing. They're not going to be willing to sit in the front of that tram anymore at the Orlando International Airport because they're afraid they could fly out the front window. And before that would sound kind of crazy, but after what happened this week, it sounds pretty reasonable to me. Obviously, it's not being too afraid to say that. So a lot of interesting stuff going on. What's amazing about the train situation as well is how quickly it has become politicized. And by the way, I haven't said hello to my producer, Tom Benson. I'm sure you've noticed this as well, Tom, how quickly this crisis of a train, so-called crisis of the Amtrak train falling, has become politicized on both sides. It seems like everything is political nowadays.
Wasn't there a vote shortly after the accident and somebody, some funding got denied for Amtrak?
Yeah, now that was already, I think, in the works, but you have people on the right who are saying we need to just cut Amtrak because it is a failure, which it was already a failure before this. It's been losing money for years. But then you have the people on the left saying we need to increase funding for Amtrak. This is the cause of the crumbling infrastructure. It's amazing. It's amazing how everything in today's world has become political. You would think something like this, a tragedy, would not be political, and they immediately make it political. It's amazing. I don't know. I'm amazed by this. Mind you of Rahm Emanuel saying at the beginning of the Obama administration said, can't let a crisis go to waste.
Exactly.
You think they would at least let the crisis happen for a couple of days before they don't let it go to waste, but this has happened immediately. I'm just amazed by this.
And our president, has he blamed the train accident yet on Fox News?
I don't know. Yeah, he likes to do that. He will make a press conference blaming it on Fox News and maybe the cops. I don't know. Somehow he will blame the cops as well and conservatives for a train accident, which it appears has nothing to do with the crumbling infrastructure. Just
speaking of Fox and cops, Fox the next day was quick to point out that the first responders on the scene were police officers.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And remember I was talking about the Boston bombers earlier. Remember the manhunt against them and how people were very happy. The cops did a great job catching the Boston bombers. And we love the cops in those situations. But then we get on social media and like to bash them for things we don't really know about or understand about. Okay, the big topic, that's what's going on in the latest news. But the big topic I want to get into, which I'm going to get into in the next segment. We're finding out every year how much the regulations brought down by the federal government and local governments is costing businesses in this country. And it's just getting higher and higher and more ridiculous and more ridiculous. So are we at the point where businesses should stop obeying these laws? Should we have civil disobedience where businesses are just going to start ignoring these regulations in such high numbers where maybe the government will have to change? Are we at that point? 407-674-1025. We're going to get into that and much more things tonight. You were listening to Beyond Reason Radio. News Radio 102.5 WFLA and BeyondReasonRadio.com.
It would be beyond reason not to listen to Yaffee on your TuneIn Radio app. Download the app today and search Beyond Reason Radio. If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. Now, back to Beyond Reason Radio.
Yes, welcome back to Beyond Reason Radio here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA and BeyondReasonRadio.com, brought to you by Doc's Street Side Grill. Okay, so here is the question that I have for you, my audience, today. Because I'm very curious, because I bet I'll get different opinions from different parts of my audience. 407-674-1025, 407-674-1025. I want you to call in and tell me, are we at the point in this country where we should start disobeying laws, disobeying the massive amounts of regulation against businesses in this country? Is it getting to that point where that is the only solution? Because we have the Tea Party, we have protests, we have trying to elect new people in to get rid of these regulations. We try to tell those people in power to get rid of these regulations, and it doesn't seem to be happening. It seems that the regulatory state just keeps growing and growing and growing. In fact, we're becoming what I've called before a government-based economy. We used to be based on the free market. They say, oh, we're service-based economy. It used to be a manufacturing-based economy. Now we're getting to the point where we're becoming a government government-based economy, where the biggest part of our economy is the government, through regulations, through bureaucracies. That's where a lot of our money is coming from, straight from the government, and all they're doing is pushing paper. They're not creating anything. 407-674-1025. Are we at that point? And let's look at some stats here. What gave me this idea is there was a new report out this week that talked about how much government regulations are costing businesses every year. What do you think that number is? $1.88 trillion. That is how much of our economy is being tied up in the government sector and complying with the massive amounts of regulations. Obamacare obviously is a big part of that. $1.88 trillion. That is more than the GDP of some countries. Our government sector of our economy, the massive regulations of our economy, is more than the GDP. Think about that. More than the GDP of some minor countries. $1.88 trillion. Imagine if we just freed these businesses from those regulations. How much wealth could be created? How much production could be created? How many jobs could be created? But it's getting to the point where small businesses, they just can't comply with these regulations. So they either go out of business or they have to hire people just to comply with regulations. It's amazing. So are we at the point where we should just start ignoring these regulations? Now, this idea came from Charles Murray, who has a book out on this. I actually got it from an article John Stossel was talking about the book. But he's saying, yes, we are at the point where we should just start ignoring these regulations. And in fact, as crazy as that sounds, there's precedent for that in this country. Think about the founding of this country. You had the Intolerable Acts, you had the Stamp Act, the tax on tea, so on and so forth. And what did they do back then? Well, obviously, eventually they just broke off from the British Empire, led to complete rebellion. But it started out where they just ignored the laws. They ignored the regulations because they couldn't do business without them. So they went around them. Now, would you say our founding fathers were lawless? They shouldn't have been doing this? I think a lot of you would support what the founding fathers did. There's also precedent today. One of the most ignored laws on the books happens in Florida every year around July 4th. And that is shooting off fireworks. Now, this is a minor detail, but think about it. There are laws where you're not supposed to shoot off these bottle rockets and other major fireworks in the air. And people do it anyways. They're just ignoring the laws, and it's got to the point where they can't enforce it. You can't enforce that if everyone's doing it. So that's the theory here, that we should just start ignoring a lot of these regulations. The businesses should just ignore them, and it will happen in such great numbers that the government will just have to get rid of them. Are we at the point? Is that the solution? 407-674-1025. 407-674-1025. Also, there's precedent for this in, my favorite book, the Bible. You might say, what? The Bible tells us we should obey the laws. We should obey government authorities. Yes, but remember what happened sometimes in the Old Testament. One of the best noted people in the Bible is Daniel. Why was he thrown in the lion's den? Well, because it was law brought down by the king that he had to bow and worship the king. And he couldn't worship any other gods. And Daniel obviously could not do that. He could only bow down to the Lord. So he says, I'm not going to follow that law. This happens other times in the Bible as well. And I would support Daniel when he was thrown in the lion's den and God saved him. Now that's an extreme example. But are we at the point? You have precedent in the Bible, you have precedent in this country where maybe that could work. Will it work? And I know you're wondering what my take is on this as well. At what point would I say we should do that? 407-674-1025. First, I'm going to take a call here from Kathleen in East Orlando. Kathleen, how are you doing? Welcome to Beyond Reason Radio.
Well, thank you, Mr. Yaffee. I'm very happy to talk with you and very happy to have picked up your program. I'm driving home.
Great.
And we need talk radio in East Orlando. They've eliminated so much of it that I'm just delighted to find you.
Oh, great. Well, I am glad you were able to find me and like the show.
Yes.
So this is your first time listening?
Yes, it is. And, of course, I recognized the name, but I wasn't sure from where. But now I know.
Oh, yeah. I usually produce, for those out there, I usually produce Bud Henninger Live in the mornings.
Now I do remember that. I wanted to touch on something you talked about earlier.
Okay, go ahead.
And that is that I am a person who is quite dependent on Amtrak because I don't like to fly.
Right.
I've used Amtrak for years, and as a matter of fact, I've been over that stretch of track where the accident occurred many times.
Okay.
And, of course, I don't know exactly all the problems with funding Amtrak, but I do know they get a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah, they get a lot of money, and they waste a lot of money, too.
On the part of some of our members of Congress is they want some accountability as to where all this money is going.
Exactly. I'm with you. What would be the best way to get that accountability, you think?
I really can't blame them for that, but it is a tremendous operation to fund, but it's needed because there's plenty of people like myself that either can't afford or cannot go through what it takes to get on a plane.
I gotcha. Kathleen, I'm glad you found the show. I hope you keep listening, and thanks so much for your support.
Can I tell you one more thing?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm very patriotic.
I have to keep her. She's new.
But every 4th of July, I am scared stiff, huddled in my house with tremendous explosions going on all around me. And
you don't like the fireworks?
What's going on? And I'm about to write a letter to the sheriff to ask him to do some patrolling in my neighborhood this 4th of July.
Really? That's an interesting take.
And I'm not the only one. Other people can be very frightened by what goes on the 4th of July.
All right, well, thanks, Kathleen. I appreciate your call. I don't usually get frightened by the fireworks. I don't know. I like fireworks, but I guess some people, yeah. Now, Tom Benson said in the talkback, animals. Now, my cat does get frightened. So when the fireworks are going off, she brought up the fireworks because I was saying the fireworks are an example of people not obeying the laws. They can't enforce it because too many people don't abide by it. And she was talking about Amtrak. I talked about Amtrak in the earlier part of the show. That has become politicized immediately. It's a tragedy, and we've already politicized it. We didn't even wait a day before politicians came out and started politicizing it. How about we privatize it? How about that? No. Yeah, Tom Benson gives me a look like that's never going to happen. Maybe that's a solution. I don't know. That's just a thought. All right, and by the way, I still want your take on whether we should start just ignoring the government regulations, ignoring the laws. 407-674-1025. I'm going to give you my take in the next segment. You are listening to Beyond Reason Radio, News Radio 102.5 WFLA, and BeyondReasonRadio.com.
Listen to the latest episodes of Beyond Reason. Download the podcast at Spreaker.com.
Welcome back to Beyond Reason Radio here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA and BeyondReasonRadio.com. So I thought about it more on the break, and I think I'm all for privatizing Amtrak. How about that? We're spending tons of money. They waste it every year. And if we're going to politicize this, I'm going to continue to politicize it. Instead of cutting funding for it, let's just completely privatize it. How about that? I like that idea. It'll probably run a lot better. Might have trains. I don't know. We're way behind in trains in terms of how Europe has trains. Now, that's because most of us drive or take planes in this country. But still, how about that? Privatize it. I like it. That's how the train started in this country. We'll privatize it. So what do you think about that, Tom?
Well, I think, if memory serves me correct, and I'm not sure when this was, but it was probably back in the 60s, the government took over the railroads because in a lot of areas because the private companies couldn't make money.
Yeah, they can figure out a way to do it now, I think. I know. That's usually the solution, is for the government just to take them over. And that happened a lot in the 60s, but...
See, they didn't have government bailouts then. Now they could do that. The private companies can take over, and if they get in trouble, just get a bailout.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the government took over Amtrak, but I don't think CSX is owned by the government.
No, they're not.
So there's a railroad company that does pretty well privately. So I don't know. That's just my take. I just was thinking about that now. We had a caller say, we need Amtrak. I want to privatize it. How about that? Why is it the government's responsibility to own railroads, for crying out loud? Maybe if a private company takes it over, they'll be much more pleasurable to ride, work much more efficiently, be more up to date and stuff. So that's my take. All right, so in the last segment as well, I was talking about, should we start ignoring the regulations? Because regulations are costing businesses in this country almost $2 trillion a year. And it's growing. It's getting more, bigger and bigger. And by the way, I can understand why people would want to just not disobey the laws, because, frankly, the people in Congress do that. They don't have to follow the laws. In fact, Bud was talking about on the show this morning that the Orange County City Commissioner hasn't paid property taxes on one of her properties for like 9 years. How does she get away with that? She literally makes votes to enforce tax laws that we have to follow, and then she decides she doesn't want to follow that. And this isn't the first case. We had Timothy Geithner did that when he became Treasury Secretary. There's others as well. They don't follow the laws. So why should we, if our leaders can't do it? But anyways, that's not my take. I'm not saying we shouldn't. Just thought I would point that out. And some other people, some other leaders with this mess think that the way to revive the American dream would be to add more laws. Is that what we need to do? I mean, we have New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio in his book, How to Revive the American Dream. Actually, it was a Washington Post article. It's co-authored by Mayor Bill de Blasio and Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren. And what they say is government policies matter and can make a difference. Strengthening the American dream is about the basics, they say. Well, what are the basics for them? Well, these are the basics. Increase the minimum wage, strengthen unions, government-directed workplace laws, government control of school programs, government R&D, government control over retirement and health care, government control over banks, and government control over trade. That's their solution. So we have almost $2 trillion in regulations already affecting businesses. $2 trillion that could go back in the private economy and revive this economy. Give people, say in my generation, who can't get full-time work, maybe find them jobs. And their solution is more of the same. So when you have leaders like that, who say stuff like that, the businesses are going to throw up their hands. And most of the small businesses aren't going to survive. Why do you think big business is so powerful in this country? Because they're the only ones that can get around the laws. They're the only ones that have enough money to hire people to go through the regulations. The small businesses can't survive that way. So we have the Democrats like Elizabeth Warren who hate big business. But it's their policies that are making the big businesses grow while small businesses fail. So I can understand why we shouldn't enforce the laws. But here's my take on this. I can't, as a good Christian person for one, but as a patriot, tell people to ignore the regulations. I don't think we're at that point yet. I really don't think we're at that point yet, that we should just start ignoring the regulations. I think the only time where I would get to a point where I would just say I cannot follow that law is not for business regulations, but would be for religious reasons. You know, I gave the example of Daniel in the Bible, who was forced by the king, the government at the time, to bow and worship him, and he couldn't do it. If we got to a point like that, where I wasn't allowed to worship my God, worship Jesus Christ, then I would say we can't follow those laws. So if we got to that point, I think maybe that would be where it was. And we're almost getting to that point in some instances. There are states and counties and other elected officials who want to force pastors to preside over gay weddings. I wouldn't blame them if they didn't want to follow those laws. I would not blame them.
Do you recall the mayor of Houston who wanted everybody who mentioned her in the pulpit or in a Sunday message to provide her with copies of their sermons?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there was a big outrage for that. And that's to the point where I would say I'm not going to follow those laws. I wouldn't blame them for not following laws. But when it comes to overburdensome business regulations, part of it is we deserve what we get. We keep voting these people in who keep doing this. You know, at least with the founding, they didn't have, it used to be no taxation without representation. That was the saying. They literally had no representation. They couldn't change anything. We still have some representation in this country, but we keep voting in these people who keep doing this. And the government keeps getting bigger and bigger. Now, the bureaucracies, we don't vote them in. They just kind of stay around forever. So when it comes to these business regulations, the real solution to that problem, which I've said before, constitutional amendments. We have to have a movement in this country, which is being started by some in the state legislatures to start state conventions to do this, and that's great. But we have to pass constitutional amendments that limit the bureaucracy, that limit the power of the federal government to do these things. Because if the government doesn't have that power, then that solves the problem. We need to get rid of a lot of these bureaucracies. And we need to stop voting in so-called conservatives who aren't willing to do that. I mean, do you honestly think Jeb Bush is going to be really willing to really cut the bureaucracy in this country? No. I don't think anybody really believes that. Do we honestly think Mike Huckabee is really going to be willing? Now, they might be better than the Democrat side. I just gave you quotes from Bill de Blasio, Elizabeth Warren. Hillary Clinton's the same way. They're going to make it even worse because they believe that's the solution to the government, to the country's problems, is more bureaucracy. They believe $1.88 trillion is not enough. I don't know how you could believe that, the way business is going in this country, but that's what they believe. The government sector economy. So 407-674-1025, if you have any take on that. I mean, there's probably a lot of you out there who believe we should just stop following the laws, and I understand that belief. I'm not to that point yet. We might get to that point in the future, but I'm not to that point yet. The other thing I talked about last week, I'm going to switch gears here. Last week, I talked a lot on this show about the NSA, the bulk collection of data, how it was unconstitutional. You want to talk about lawless. And we talk about should we follow the laws. The government obviously doesn't follow their own rules and their own laws. And the people in government don't. And one example of that was the bulk collection of data. They were going against the Fourth Amendment. So I talked about we had a movement called Restore the Fourth, that we need to get rid of this. And there seems to be a movement to finally do that. Rand Paul was the only presidential candidate who did that. So a lot of people cheered this week when the House of Representatives passed what was called the USA Freedom Act that was supposed to get rid of the NSA and this bulk collection of data, phone records that they've been doing. That the only reason we know about it is because Edward Snowden leaked it to the public. So there was a lot of celebration of that. But should we be celebrating that? I started doing I found some articles on this and did a little more research on this, and I'm not sure that this is the big, great news that we thought it was. While it might seem good on the surface and it was supposed to be a compromise, because we need this for our safety. Because it stopped people like the Boston bomber. Oh, wait, no, it didn't. But the compromise, they really didn't change much. In fact, the NSA is just as happy with the USA Freedom Act as many Republicans in Congress who are saying we're getting rid of the bulk collection of data. The NSA themselves are happy with it. And I'm going to tell you why coming up in the next segment. You are listening to Beyond Reason Radio, News Radio 102.5 WFLA and BeyondReasonRadio.com.
Subscribe to the Beyond Reason podcast today on your Stitcher app and hear the voice of reason anytime.
Yes, welcome back to Beyond Reason Radio. You can subscribe on the Stitcher app. I'm also available on the TuneIn Radio app if you want to subscribe there. Make sure to like my page on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond Reason Radio. You can download the podcast on iTunes as well. Spreaker.com. Many places to get the podcast. The easiest way, of course, though, is to go to my website, beyondreasonradio.com. And you can always stream the show live on the iHeartRadio app at News Radio 1025. So plenty of ways to catch the show. By the way, when I was talking about should we disobey some of the government regulations, the overbearing government regulations, I forgot about one of the businesses I always support on this show that's actually doing the same thing, and that's Uber. Uber has decided in a lot of cases to ignore the cab regulations. In fact, they're doing that in Orlando right now, that they're going to pay if someone gets ticketed because they're an Uber driver, Uber's just going to pay it. So there's an example right there of them ignoring it, and I don't blame them because what they're doing is just trying to start a business, trying to let the free market work, and it's the government that's getting in their way, of course. Of course. So I talked about last week in a lot of detail about the NSA, bulk collection of phone records, bulk collection of data. And of course, when you think about it, this is just what we know the NSA is doing because Edward Snowden leaked it. There's probably a lot of stuff we don't know they're doing that they might be breaking the law. So that's very interesting. This is why we have to trust our elected officials when we elect them when it comes to this stuff. And, well, that's very hard to do, obviously, with the precedent of many elected officials. But I talked about how it's unconstitutional. I've talked about how we need to get rid of it, that there needs to be proper oversight, not just general warrants, but specific warrants if we're going to do this right to collect phone data. And I've talked about before how it's just not going to work anyways. There's just too much data. In fact, we become so dependent on the technology that we forget about good old-fashioned police work, detective work, men in the field agents, and stuff like that. We don't want to become too dependent on the technology. Well, I wasn't the only one who thought that. Apparently, and I had a great article here from the Daily Beast that talked about this, apparently the NSA themselves were thinking the same thing. Before Snowden leaked all this information about the NSA and the bulk collection of data, the NSA was thinking about revamping it or getting rid of it, changing it, because it was too burdensome. It was costing too much money. It was way too much work, and it wasn't really stopping any terrorist attacks anyways. It was becoming more of a hassle than a benefit. Now, once Edward Snowden leaked all this data, then the NSA had to defend it, and the government had to defend it, and that's why they kept it around for longer. But this week, the House of Representatives passed what's called the USA Freedom Act, which amends the part of the Patriot Act that apparently allows the NSA to do that. And a lot of civil libertarians and Republicans have been out there saying this is a great thing. This is the great compromise because it prevents the NSA from doing this bulk collection of data. But guess what? It doesn't really get rid of the bulk collection of data. In fact, it's just farming it out to the phone companies. So what's happening is the phone companies, the big phone companies, are going to be the ones keeping this bulk collection of data. And then the NSA will just be able to go to the phone companies and use that. Now, they say there's some other regulations that will prevent the NSA from doing this too much. But the fact is, we're talking about how this is a big win for the people. And the NSA, yes, the NSA got what was coming to them. But it turns out that the NSA didn't want this anymore to begin with. So when we have people out there saying, we need this program for our safety, we stopped all these terrorist attacks, the NSA, we need this part of it. You know, we might not like it, but we need it. The NSA themselves don't even think we need it. It's amazing. It's unbelievable. So we think it's a big win, but it turns out the NSA got it what it wanted. They don't even have to do the major part of the work. The phone companies just have to do it. And then they can just use the FISA court like they've been doing and just authorize them to go get the phone data from the phone companies. In fact, there's no evidence that the FISA courts will stop granting requests to the NSA. So now the NSA, instead of going to their own data, will go to the phone companies and they'll do whatever they request that way. They'll still get all this collection of data. In fact, they might get even more now because the phone companies will keep everything. And the NSA will just use it that way. So the NSA wins, the phone companies win, and the people still lose. And I doubt it's going to really stop anything anyways. So that's where we are. And I told you. Now, the good thing about this, there is one good thing about this. I told you the biggest thing that made me afraid of what the NSA was doing was what Snowden said when he first came out with this information. He was saying this puts the infrastructure in place, that all we would need is a major crisis, the infrastructure would be there, and a bad leader who would just take it over and use it for bad reasons. If they haven't already done that. We don't even know if they've already done that in some cases. And Snowden called it turnkey tyranny. That all it would take was just that one leader to use it in a crisis to turn the key and use it for tyranny. This might prevent that from happening somewhat because it gets rid of some of that infrastructure to be able to do that. They would have to take over the phone companies. But it's still the NSA spying on us, just a different way of doing it. So we're cheering for that. Some of you might think it's a good idea. We still have a long way to go. So before I go tonight, though, there's another story I have to share with you I found interesting because I fall victim to this myself. Tom Benson, how much of the news, you probably watch the news just as much as I do. How much of the news do you think, and I don't really have an answer for this, but doesn't it seem like a lot of the news is based on polls, new polling data?
Yeah, sure. All the organizations themselves do it. CBS, Wall Street Journal, NBC.
Yeah, they get out a poll, and then we've created a news story about polling. Well, I just found some information recently that was talking about how these polls have been great for getting clicks on your website and stuff like that, but they're not really becoming accurate predictors of what's happening. So we're making all this news about polls. We're obsessed with polls in this country, about what's happening in this country, and then the polls end up being wrong. Some examples of that are what happened in the British election last week. The polls said that it was close, but the Conservatives won the seats in Parliament, the majority of seats, and defeated Labour by more than 6 percentage points, a lot more than the polls were saying. The Israeli election was the same way, where they thought Benjamin Netanyahu might be out of office, and he won pretty handily. And then we had the U.S. midterm elections, where they didn't predict that it would be that much of a big Republican landslide. These are just some examples of polls. And unfortunately, I fall into this sometimes, too, because it's easy news. That's why they do it. It's easy news. So it's easy. They can make a story out of it, make some controversy, and everyone's talking, and it doesn't even matter. It's not even based on reality. It's just based on perception. So that was just my Beyond Reason flabbergasted segment of the day. I thank you all for listening. Make sure to go to my website, beyondreasonradio.com, if you missed any of the show. Like the Facebook page, Beyond Reason Radio, facebook.com/Beyond Reason Radio. And I'm here every Friday night. Beyond Reason brought to you by Doc Streetside Grill, and I'll see you next week.
Comes from difference. I look inside.